Some folks will like you and some that just won't. Some that stay real and some that just don't. Trying to fit in will only take you so far. You'll never find home trying to change who you are. So don't spend your whole life trying to be what you ain't. You can't hide your heart with a new coat of paint. You think they'll accept you, I promise they can't. So just be who you are, forget what they think. So just be who you are and forget what they think.
Welcome to Vet with a Mic, content driven by veterans issues. So today we're going to talk to Tyler, who is just an intricate part of the Coming Home Well organization, which is a really cool organization that has a few different podcasts within the cluster that offer up just great information for veterans in the transition space. So we're going to talk a little bit about what Tyler's life was like in the uniform, and then we're going to get right into the great divide that is transition. Tyler, buddy, how you doing today?
Good. How are you, Ryan?
Man, you know, I got to say it every single time. I can't complain. Maybe one day it'll stick, right?
I always say you can complain, but it doesn't do any good.
Not at all. Nobody listens anyway. So,
Tyler,
tell us
frustrated.
Right. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your time in the uniform. I'm always interested to hear how people ended up in the uniform, because in my case, it was a bit like running away and joining the circus. So tell us how you got there.
So it was a little bit of I always wanted to. My great uncle, who is my godfather, was in the Korean War. My grandfather was in World War II. I sort of was around it, but not really. You know, my parents didn't serve, but it was always sort of like that ideal of, you know, like, oh, go serve. And in high school, I said, you know, I really want to go serve. And I was getting sick of school. I was like, I wasn't challenged. I was bored. So in my junior year, between my junior and senior year, I had signed up for the reserves. I did something called the split option. So I went to basic training between my junior and senior year in high school. And so you're in the reserves, and so you're able to go. I was 17 years old in basic training at Fort McClellan, Alabama. The base doesn't even exist anymore. That shows I'm getting old. And you know, these memories burn in your head about, in fact, I say that because I went in the summer and burnt my head so bad. We all did, because it was 4th of July celebration and we're all freshly shorn, no hair. And all of us had burned our scalps. And so I'll remember that. And it's been, 30 years, 25, a long time. I don't want to age myself. And so I went the summer between my junior and senior year. And then I went back to high school and finished my senior year. And I said, you know, let me make sure, you know what, I'm going to go do this full time. And so I joined the Army full time, regular Army. And then I was a combat engineer. I had changed jobs to be able to go full time. And I did that for a couple of years. And I said, this is a lot of work. Now I spent most of it deployed. I was over in Germany. And then that was during the Balkans when we were going to Bosnia and Herzegovina. And so I deployed a lot. I said, yeah, I want to try something more, but I loved it because I learned how the Army really works. You know, not the office side, but the down in the dirt, living in a tent, did all that. And I said, oh, let me change it up. And so I had an opportunity. You could re-enlist early. So I did. And they said, hey, we have this behavioral science. You work in an office. I said, that sounds great. And so I did that, and I went to training for about a couple of years. They train you as a combat medic in case you fail, because there's a number of people that fail the longer course. Yeah. And so I didn't fail, but I did the combat training. Then I did the 1.5 years of mental health training. And so I did that, and I went out to Fort Lewis and met some wonderful folks. It was a great assignment. And then I said, you know, gosh, and I hate to say it because I was a drug and alcohol counselor, but it's like, these people don't need treatment. They need to go to jail. I was a little frustrated at the time. So I became a CID special agent. I had applied and was able to go doing the internship and do all the training. And I spent a lot of time in DC. And I was stationed in DC for most of the time. I was also in South Carolina and a few other places, deployed to Iraq, did a bunch of things as an agent. And then eventually I had gotten hurt while I was in Iraq. And so I was medically retired. They had stationed me back at Walter Reed as an agent. I had been there before, and which really was great taking care of me because nobody wants to be sitting around doing nothing.
Right.
And so I was able to work while they were processing all, my medical appointments and all the other fun stuff. So then I was medically retired. And this is about 12 years in. I had been in service literally since I was a junior in high school. And all of a sudden, I didn't know what the heck to do.
Right. Yeah.
So it was a scary time.
Yeah. So what year
I knew
was
the
this?
Army.
Yeah. What year was this whenever they let you go?
So 2006 is when I was medically retired.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So that was, man, there was a lot of people that were separating around that time just because there was the initial push in 2001 where there was a huge surge of enlistments. And then that was really whenever I think all DOD wide, they went, uh-oh, what do we do now? We've got all these people that we're re-releasing into the wild, so to speak. And so, yeah, that's around the time when the deficiencies started to become glaring, that people were like, oh man, we need to do something about transition. So let me ask you, because the uniform was a huge part of your life. And we talk a lot about just the loss of identity and status that comes out of transition, because you go from this really cool, I'm a member of a team and what I do matters and what I say matters to people, to now you're just another asshole walking around Walmart, right?
Right.
So tell us, did you notice that strain coming out of the uniform? Was that something that you could, I guess, articulate at the time?
So there was a few moments of stark panic. My wife and I had been recently married, less than a year. She was pregnant, and they don't give you a lot of time when you medically retire. You don't get, medical leave. You don't get transition leave. You get orders, and you have to be gone in like 30 days, and you don't know when that's going to happen. So trying to find a job, or even what to do, or how to find a job, because they had TAP and they had, but in 2006 they didn't have a lot.
Right. Yeah.
And so it was a really scary, like, how am I going to eat? Yeah. Now, my wife was in the military as well. And so we were both kind of like, she was getting out because of not medical, because she was pregnant and she didn't want to move and leave me. You know how these assignments go. And so we're like, oh crap, what the heck do we do? How are we going to, feed ourselves and pay the rent and everything else? And fortunately, things worked out really well. She was working at the Pentagon. I was working at Walter Reed and the Pentagon at Fort Myer, and we talked to a lot of people. Yeah. And just as we were getting out, they were starting up a new program where they needed people with a lot of forensic and law enforcement experience.
Sure.
And so it was the biometric and identity intelligence concept. It was literally a concept at that point. We were the first 6 people. We were working on stand-up tables, but we were offered a job to come down to Charlottesville and help stand this up. And we're like, oh yeah, that'd be great. I'm from Richmond. It's right down the road.
Right.
That's where I wanted to be. We didn't want to move too far. It's a couple hours from DC, and it's like an hour from Richmond. So it's near the rest of my family. And so there was about maybe 30 days in between. And it was somebody we'd known and worked with in other capacities. He had retired and said, you guys would be perfect. I'll hire you both.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? This is great.
Yeah, that's really interesting. First of all, you have to be a real dummy, right, to just automatically get selected for something like that. I'm joking, because, you have your PhD in computer science, I believe would be the layman term to use. But to kind of just go back to a second ago, in the literature, we see a lot about home front stressors. And there was actually some literature that had been done that one of the things that makes transition particularly challenging is whenever you have a spouse and a family, which people kind of saw that as an unexpected outcome. because normally you think of these are social support elements and that it would ease the transition, but it actually made it more difficult. And it's interesting to me that you guys both coming from the uniform, both separating at nearly the same time, that must have been a really unique interaction that maybe a lot of people can't necessarily relate to, because it's like both of you are leaving the safety of the uniform, so to speak, the security of it at the same time. But no, obviously I say that, jokingly. I'm ribbing you a little bit. It was
scary.
Yeah.
Like, you don't know what's going to happen. And in fact, they wanted to hire her because he had worked with her, and she said, well, we're a package deal.
That's nice of her. Yeah.
And the program manager where we were going was like, hey, I only want intel people. And I was law enforcement only, and she had been intel and then an agent. So she was a special agent, and she was protecting Secretary Wolfowitz and Secretary Rumsfeld, like, senior level folks. Wow. That's how she met this guy. And he's a lieutenant colonel. He had retired, and we're still great friends. And he's like, nope, it's a package deal. And now he's the senior vice president because, he's a big officer. Yeah. And the guy down there is like, I only want this one. I seen the resumes. And he's like, no, this isn't an option. I'm telling you, they're starting, and get it ready. And I'm like, thank God, because we were, what the heck do you do? Yeah. It was a short, chaotic, trying to move with a pregnant wife. And in fact, she had to stay up there the last few months because she was giving birth at now what they call Walter Reed, but it was Bethesda at the point. That's where her doctors were, everything. And I was commuting back and forth from DC down to Charlottesville, and she was delayed because she was having the baby, our oldest son. And it was a chaotic time, but if the biggest takeaway I always tell folks, go network with everybody.
Yeah, for sure.
That is what sort of made it for us. I mean, it was crazy because, you serve in the military, and I've been in 12 years and made rank real fast, but you still don't make a lot of money. I mean, that's just the reality. You make good money, but it's not great money.
Yeah, it's not life-changing money. Yeah, for sure.
Right. It's not like, like you still have to be pretty budget conscious.
Sure.
And all of a sudden, I was making 2.5 times what I was making in the military.
Goodness.
Like immediately. And so was she. Yeah. And I was like, wow. We were like, wow, hey, what do we do with all this extra money? And so we'd saved it, and, we're pretty cheap folks.
Yeah.
Frugal. Spend on the good things.
Frugal's
probably people. Better.
Yeah.
And so it worked out, and we did that for a few years. But because it was a military environment, every single person that worked with us had been in the military in some shape, form, or fashion.
Right.
They were either other agents, or they're intel people, or, EOD folks. Yeah. So it really made it easy, and the culture just fit.
Right. Yeah. So I describe that as kind of the military orbit, right? So you're still like surrounding the general military culture, and that does make it a lot easier for those who transition out of the uniform, because you don't have to pick up a new social script. I think that's a lot of the problems that people have in transition, is they try to use a social script from the uniform and apply it to civilian settings. And it is not a 1-for-1, right?
No, it's not exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it made it easier because there's a lot of folks that were, but the environment and the rank structure, there wasn't one.
Right.
And so, like, the guy next to me is a retired colonel. The guy next to me is a CW4. And then you had somebody who's a specialist like 2 weeks ago, and we're all essentially equal.
See, I love that idea. That was one of the things that I found most cumbersome, was the hierarchy, because largely most of us are trying to change our station in life whenever we enlist. I would say that that's a pretty common story. Maybe not everybody, but I grew up from humble roots, right? So
me too.
Yeah, right. Joining the uniform, that was a way for me to really change my status or my station in life, right? And that was one of the things that I found particularly constraining, was there was less at times, depending upon the post, there was less of a collaborative work environment, more this is the way we do things, right? And that was really difficult for me to adjust to early on, because I was thinking that it was more collaborative and that this is team-based. And whenever I was in mobile security, it was team-based. So I really thrived there. But whenever I got to base police, whoa, all of a sudden what was on your collar mattered a lot more, right?
And I think that it's also a lot with the different cultures and the different parts of the military, or even within each service. There's a wide range of how people interact and sort of talk with each other. I mean, I was in a very small organization.
Yeah.
It's like 2,500 spread across the world. And you know everybody pretty much by reputation, or you know them personally, or you served with them previously. And so it was a very first name basis kind of thing. And so that kind of helped the transition, because I was sort of used to the more civilian way of doing things.
Yeah.
I mean, we wore civilian clothes. We, didn't have, you had rank and there was structure, but it wasn't as rigid.
Yes.
So that helped. But at the same time, I used to be in the combat arms, which, that's very much that corporal telling that specialist what the sergeant said is like law. It's not like, up for debate.
Not a suggestion. Yeah.
Right. In every other parts, it's that's a terrible idea. We should try this instead. Yeah. Oh, that'll go over once. But in the civilian world, that's expected. And that was a weird difference.
Yeah.
Kind of felt unnatural a little bit.
Sure. So I want to ask you about something. And by all means, if this is too close to home, let me know. So you mentioned that you got medically retired, and you noticed that you mentioned that you had sustained an injury while in theater. Can we talk a little bit more? Because you and I talked offline, and you talked about the TBI, and I just want people to know that part of your story as well.
So I had a TBI, and I didn't know what it was at first. Just had this massive, massive headache, and it just kept going, and they'd check you out and they're like, you'll be fine. Take some Motrin. And I was like, this isn't right over time. And so I just sort of sucked it up until I was redeploying in a couple weeks anyway. And I was like, okay, just got my bell rung. It's still ringing, and things just weren't quite right. And so I said, okay, I'll wait till I go to a real doctor. I'll put that in air quotes when I'm back in the States. And I was already redeploying. It wouldn't have gotten me home any faster. I wasn't trying to get out of anything. Right. But it was like, there wasn't really that kind of support available. And we didn't understand TBIs in 2004 at the time. Yeah. As when I was leaving Iraq, we didn't understand it. We don't have anywhere near the understanding now that we did.
Yeah. We're still learning too. Yeah.
Oh yeah. There's way more, but it was like nothing back then. Yeah. And so when I got back, fortunately I had wonderful leadership, wonderful organization. I had gone and they sent me to a neurologist. They said, yeah, you have a TBI and this is really bad. And so we're going to send you to Walter Reed. They need to do some things, check you out. And I said, well, I really don't want to go to the warrior transition. I had heard all the horror stories of just being left to your own devices and everything else. They said, well, Tyler used to be at Walter Reed as an agent. Why don't we send you back there and you just do your appointments? And if, that way you're right there. And it turned, it's worked out really well because I knew the area, I knew the places, I knew the people, and it was really comfortable. Going back to there's only 3 people in that office for my office there. So going back, I had literally the same office like years later in the old historic MP building. It was on the 2nd floor. We had our own entrance, but I knew it well. And I was really, really grateful for the fact that they put me back and I could do my appointments. And eventually my doctors are like, dude, you can stay in, because the policy at the time was if you wanted to stay in, you could stay in. And I had a lot of decisions to make. I've only known the military at that point in my life, like 12 years. I was a sergeant first class in E7. I was making rank real fast. And what do I do? It was a hard decision. Like, do I say, nah, I don't want to get out. I just want to, suck it up and take a profile and not be able to do anything fun anymore.
Yeah.
And that was the balance. It was like, well, I can't go on the helicopters. I can't deploy. I can't do all the fun stuff.
All the high speed stuff. Yeah.
Right. And so I was like, let me see. And then I did the math. I'm a pretty calculating, careful person. I look at all the pros and cons, and I looked at it and go, okay, I could go another 8 years and retire, or I could retire now and get the same benefits immediately.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that sounds like a better option.
Sure.
But I had no plan, no exit strategy, because you really don't know these things when you're getting medically retired.
Yeah.
You don't know it's hard to interview for a job. When can you start? I don't know.
Right.
When are you going to be out of the military? Don't know. You'll get 30 days notice and you have to be gone. And I was like, wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's really hard to plan your life around that somebody else's schedule for sure. Yeah.
Right. And I'm renting a house up in DC. My wife and I are there. My 3 dogs, or our 3 dogs, and all this stuff. And fortunately, she was still in, and so there was a little bit of stability and super supportive. But it's it's a big transition, and so
Sure.
like I talked, fortunately it all worked out. But I've learned that TBIs are so misunderstood.
Yes, they are.
Because I'll tell you, when I was in, and I look back and I cringe, and I have a lot more empathy than I ever used to. I know that's probably a surprise. But
yeah, it depends on the area. Yeah, that's one of the things that makes TBIs so difficult to pin down, is because the brain, depending upon where the trauma was sustained, there are just so many things that change whenever with damage to certain parts of the brain. And it's not uniform. There's just so much variability there that a lot of people may not necessarily be aware that there is a shift at the moment. I assume now, you said that this was in Iraq. Was this from a concussive blast, I'm guessing?
Yeah, rocket had landed. Fortunately, I didn't get injured. It was right next to us, and it landed on the other side of a wall. And then we had windows and whatnot, and just the concussive blast through us. But the shrapnel and the explosive part all got absorbed by the wall.
Yeah.
So there was bits of, debris everywhere, but it wasn't, nobody got killed. And nobody got a Purple Heart out of this thing. It was just, we had taken pictures after, because it was like, oh, check this out. All of our laundry has all this holes in it. And because we had laundry lines hanging out in that area. And we're like, okay, everyone's ears are ringing. And I'm not sure if I got knocked out. I'm pretty sure I did, just for that short period of time.
Yeah.
You just don't know. But we were also getting attacked at the same time.
Sure.
By about 200 folks attacking where we were. And so it was like a combined attack. And so once we got our stuff together, we realized, oh, we're under attack, and running to the walls to help defend.
Yeah.
And so it was all that, and it was at night. It was all these things combined. And so I was like, but I was talking about being sympathetic, because before I would think that people that were complaining about migraines and like severe headaches were the biggest fakiers, the biggest,
malingerers. Yeah.
Like, so full of crap. Like doesn't exist. It's all in your head. You're just trying to get out of work. And all of a sudden, because I never had headaches, never had any sort of thing, all of a sudden, I'm having the worst head pain I could imagine. And I'm like, oh, migraine.
Gives you perspective. Yeah. For sure.
Yeah. And my neurologist started laughing at me, because he knew. I was like, yeah. I'm like, migraine? No, that's for women. And he's like, no, that's not it. And then I also had a female neurologist who was absolutely wonderful and had done a bunch of research, initial research, I guess, because she saw so many Iraq and Afghanistan patients. And this was early part. She's like, yeah, this is actually pretty common. And I was like, oh, okay. But I had no sympathy before. Now I'm like the most sympathetic of, migraines, and all sorts of these other things.
Yeah.
And you do have effects that you don't think about.
Yeah.
Because we think about open head wounds and things like that. And there's all these gradations of effects. Some people get depressed. Some people have big mood swings. Some people get violent. Some people turn to drugs and alcohol to cope with the constant pain.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I was able to avoid those things. But at the same time, I've tried every treatment there is, because I was like, there's got to be something that helps. There isn't a lot, to be honest.
Yeah.
That's sort of the challenge. But you got to keep trying. I'm trying one of the new ones that they just came out. So you keep trying to see if something works. But the behavioral stuff, you see it and you can feel it. In my case, I know what I'm doing. And like, you have to literally, all right, calm down. You're getting overexcited about something that doesn't need to be, or you're getting pissed off because you get tired and cranky and your head hurts and you start running your mouth. So I have to consciously, very on purpose, go, okay.
Yes. Yeah. I don't, I'm going to space on the name, but I want to say it's the transition warrior. But that could not be it. Anyway, Colonel Hodges, who is an MD, wrote it, and he talks about how frequent TBIs and PTSD occur within the same space, and a lot of times things may be attributed to PTSD that may be TBI, and vice versa. And it's really hard to tease out symptoms from each one of those types of disorders, because they can look similar. There's a lot of overlap, behaviorally, or just some of the psychological impacts that can come along with TBI or with PTSD. Yeah, that's interesting. So I want to get to one thing as well. Despite all of that, right? As I mentioned in my rather poorly framed joke, you went on and did some pretty high level academics as well. Like, so you went on to get your master's after the uniform, and then your PhD as well. So even when engulfed with some of the injuries related to the uniform, you still have lived a really high functional life academically. Yeah.
And so the military is great. I mean, I always recommend it for folks because the GI Bill is friggin' awesome. Okay.
It is.
And if you don't use it, you're throwing away tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars. You're just throwing it away. I don't care if you go learn how to be a welder, or learn how to do HVAC, or study computer science. It doesn't matter. Go study something, because they're paying you to go. And so I went and got my master's in cybersecurity policy. And my wife actually went and got her MBA because she just didn't want it to expire and not use it. And we said, and it was sort of a competition between us.
I was going to say, was it she didn't want to be outdone by you? That's
very much
question.
So. Yeah. Very much so. And she had actually started her MBA first. And then I said, well, I'm going to go get my master's too. And so we were like, it was kind of chaos in our house. We have 3 kids. And so we're both in school. And so I had finished my master's and I was like really enjoying it. And I transitioned from doing the identity intelligence part. I helped a lot with the artificial intelligence. And when I was an agent, I did a lot of cyber forensics and crimes against children investigation. So I had a background. That's what my undergrad was in. And so I sort of had a pretty good background. But then I was able to switch over when cybersecurity as an intelligence function was brand new. Even before Cybercom was a thing, I was helping identify threats to the U.S. and vulnerabilities of our adversaries, seeing what we could do to them. So it was really fun. It was new, and there really wasn't a lot of other folks doing it. And so it was like, oh, this is awesome. Get us do these cool things and help form it. And so I went and got my master's in policy, because so much of this didn't have policy at the time.
Sure.
And so I was helping write policy. I was doing a lot of analysis, and I said, hey, they have this program, and I work for the government, and it's basically a sabbatical scholarship. And I said, oh, I'm going to apply for it. So I applied for it the first year, didn't get it. but I said, you know what, I'll try again. Every year is different. They have a different focus. And what it is, you can use your GI Bill, obviously go after hours, everything. But I wanted to go get a PhD. And you cannot get a PhD you can, I guess. I mean, there are people that do it, but it's really tough to do all the classes and all the research part-time in the evenings.
Sure. Yeah.
It's just really challenging. It can be done. So if you're thinking about it, it's possible, but you got to understand something that's going to take 3, 4, 5 years. It's going to take 6, 7, 8. It's just, and that's working. That's like doing as much as you can.
Yeah.
And so I said, I'm going to apply for this thing. I had really good grades from undergrad and my master's, and it's kind of a new area. Let me try. The least they can do is say no. And turned out I got it. There's about 10 of us across the DoD that get it. And it's a great, great program because they pay for school. They pay your salary while you go to school. And like my school is down in Florida at Fort Lauderdale. I chose well. I had a choice between that and another program in South Dakota.
Oh, wow.
And,
yeah.
And it's a great school, Dakota State. They have a wonderful cyber program. However, I had no interest in going to South Dakota in the winter.
No, not at all.
And so I said, you know what? I'll go with the Florida one. Let's go do that. And they would fly. I'd be able to go TDY to all my classes and all the meetings and everything else. And then they fly me home. It was, there's no way I could have done it otherwise.
Yeah.
And so I spent about 2.5 years doing that full time. And then I go back to work. I finished all the courses and now I'm doing my research in the dissertation.
Yeah.
So I had like 2.5 years of classes, and then the pandemic hits. And so we're working from home and I'm doing a lot of stuff, but you have a lot more free time when you don't have all the traffic and, all the other things you were doing.
Yeah.
And my wife, I love her to death. She's so supportive. She's like, if you don't finish that dissertation while we are working from home and you have basically infinite time, I'm going to kill you. And so she would kick everybody out. I'm in my office now. She would kick everybody out and, close the doors and say, go do your research. And so I was able to finish. This is 1.5 to 2 years ago, only because I had that time with the pandemic. So I think God was working in his own ways, kind of like making up for lost time. And it was really awesome to be able to finish because, like so much is invested in that, whether it's getting a master's and doing like social work or anything. It was a whole different thing for me because like when I was in high school, I knew I was going in the Army.
Right. Yeah.
And I was bored to tears. Like if you knew me then, you'd be like, dude, he is not an academic guy.
Well, it's funny. It's funny you say that. Bright people tend to be that way, actually. I mean, it's just whenever there is a lot of, let's just say, rigid structure around like intellectual pursuits, it's really constraining for people who are bright. They find it's pretty boring. They don't like having to go at the same pace as another person, but that's the way the school system has to be because everybody has to stay on track. But, I felt that way. Not that I'm calling myself that bright necessarily, but I felt that way. It was just largely like, okay, here we go. Another class, whatever. But then as I went, whenever I went to the university after the uniform, because I think I wasn't mature enough yet. But when I went to the university after the uniform, I realized I had more of an intellectual curiosity than I remember having as a youth, right? All of a sudden now that art history class was remarkably fascinating to me because I could learn from a different approach, a different angle. So let's talk about one baby into the next. So you just finished your one baby, your PhD. So let's talk about the other baby, coming home well. Because you guys are doing a lot of great things out there in the veteran space. So how'd you end up hooking up with Coming Home Well?
So the organization was originally a 501c3, I think in 2018, but it'd been around for 3 or 4 years before. And it was essentially a radio show. It was founded by a couple veterans and really hosted by one of them. And he needed a co-host and asked me to co-host with him. And so we were going in, and it was live radio at a local radio station here in town. And we'd go and interview people and have them come into the show. And it was, it was live. It was, the producer the engineer sitting right there, doing ads and time and having to manage when you start and stop, which is a whole different ball of wax.
Right. Yeah.
Because you have hard stops and soft stops and all these things. And it was a lot of fun. But it was on Saturday mornings. I have to go get up and drive into the town, go to the radio station and do it. And it was fun. And I was doing it. And then he decided to go on another venture. He'd go on a different route, step away from the organization. And we had that time a board of directors that was kind of new, people that had been recruited or part of it. And we said, okay, what are we going to do? And we continued on the radio for a good while, probably another year. And then with the pandemic, we couldn't do the normal things that we did. You couldn't bring people into a small enclosed, room and have conversations. And so we decided, hey, we're going to go do the podcast. And we used to always put the radio program on the podcast, just like the entire thing with the ads and whatnot, and just post it. And so if you missed it, you could go listen to it. But it wasn't designed as a podcast. It wasn't set up. It wasn't sort of going that way. And we said, well, let's do the podcast. Okay. It has been a fantastic thing. It's greatly increased our reach, and it allows us to talk to a lot more people because it's not like the local listening area or, what's happening just in the 50 or 100 miles around us. Yeah. We'd have a lot of politicians and other folks come in and talk and what they plan to do, especially if they were veterans. It was awesome. But getting the podcast going was pretty cool. And over the last 2 years, I guess, last really 18 months, we've expanded it because Coming Home Well is the name of my podcast, but it's also the name of our organization. Right. And I call it our new empire. We're like our own network now. And so people heard us or talked with me. They were interviewed or were talking with our sister organization. It's a part of us, but it is focused on the caregivers, which is really kind of cool because we realized, these people, the people in our lives, the ones, especially with the veterans that are not able to care for themselves 100%. They need that support, and the spouse is staying home to give it to them and everything else. Well, they need that support too. And so we have an entire effort. It's called Behind the Service, and it's focused on the family members of the veterans. And it's aimed at them. Every interview, every show, it's a whole podcast series that is aimed to support those men and women, or mostly women, I should honestly, but women and men, the family members, but also we've always looked at, hey, veterans have a lot of shows to listen to. Right. Yeah. We want to make sure our shows are accessible to the family members as well. Right. Yeah. So, hey, I'm worried about my cousin Jimmy or my brother or my sister or whomever it is that's important to me. We want them to be able to come listen to Coming Home Well and learn about resources and opportunities and sort of the lingo and how things work. And so we have those two. And then we also have Beyond the Frontline. It's hosted by two Air Force veterans, which the whole frontline thing, I think it's an Air Force term. I don't know. But they're awesome, and they're life coaches. And that's what they do in real life. And they talk about, what to do, your brain and neurofeedback and human behavior and what is introspection. I mean, they do some really cool shows. And then we also have somebody who is so full of life. Her name is Jennifer, and it's A Joyful Life. And Jennifer Balu, and it's really kind of motivational, I guess you'd say, Now I know there's one Air Force officer, and she's got her
PhD in clinical psych, right? Is that
Yep.
Is that
That's
Jennifer?
Tiffany Tajiri.
Oh, okay.
And that is Peace After Combat as the other show. So, I mean, that's why I say we're the network now.
Yeah.
And Peace After Combat, and go listen to it. If you go to cominghomewell.com, click on the podcast, you can see them all, and they're all listed and they're separated by the different topics.
Yeah. I know there's one section called Meet the Team, and you can just see what everybody's
you can click on all and read about them and see who's there.
So to your point, though, I wanted to say this. Veterans are not an island, right? And so we have to kind of take a systems approach with things. And to your point, largely it's the significant others, it's the family members who apply pressure to the veterans to get help about certain things, because largely we may be ignoring them and just pretending as if they don't exist, that the problem's not there, because we're kind of a prideful bunch. We don't want to necessarily feel like we're taking advantage of resources. There's a lot of misconceptions about, well, I don't want to use that, that's for somebody else, all of those things that we come with. And so spouses and children, all the dependent orbit there of the veteran, they end up they're the advocate of change in the veteran's life often. And you're correct. A lot of the stuff that is targeted towards the veteran may largely inadvertently, I say, ignore this huge component to what the veteran's life is actually about.
Right.
And yeah, I'm glad that you guys are taking up that space as well, because it is such a vital part of getting a veteran to the right resources. Is if you can sell it to the spouse, they will goad them enough, much like your wife did with your PhD.
Absolutely.
They will goad them to the correct way.
Not goaded, she facilitated.
Yeah,
so I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that two of our board members and they're both members of the executive committee are family members of veterans with TBIs and PTSD. And so they live it. And so they're super involved with everything. But they said, this is an area that needs coverage, that needs help and support and attention. And so we were able to sort of, oh, yes, you're absolutely right. How do we address that? And so that's why we do a lot of focus on the family. It's beyond the
pun
service.
intended.
Yeah, I don't mean to, and so, but there is one thing I neglected to mention, and it's so important, and it is such a great thing. We have a wonderful partnership with the Department of Veteran Services here in the Commonwealth. So we get staff to come in and answer our questions. Like recently we had a 4-part series all about how to get benefits. And these are the folks that actually go to the veterans appeals, where they go to the court, so they know all the challenges. Yeah. And it's a wonderful thing to hear the lawyers that are going to do the court and saying, hey, these are the challenges and here's how you overcome them. And hey, you had bad paper getting out. And a lot of times people think, I had bad paper, I can't ever use the VA. And
what the hell is bad paper?
Like a bad discharge.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Like
that makes sense. It should have been intuitive, right? Yeah. Okay.
Bad conduct discharge, or even a dishonorable, or a general under other than honorable.
Yeah.
And
which is that's a weird condition.
It is. It is.
I mean, you can get an OTH for, being out of standards.
A lot of things.
Yeah.
And so I learned, and I didn't know, you think I would know, is that getting your discharge upgraded, everybody always says, oh, you just wait a year or two and you write in and they'll upgrade it. This is not true, people. This is not
you mean
true
it's not
at
a
all.
form? Yeah, it's not just
no. Yeah. And even if you've been a great person, everything else, they're not changing it generally. But the VA can characterize your service for VA purposes as honorable for VA purposes. So even though you might have an OTH or a BCD or something like that, bad paper, some sort of thing, they can go and give you the same benefits as if you had an honorable. They make that determination. Now, the service isn't changing their characterization of service. So you still have an other than honorable, you still have a bad conduct, but the VA says, we don't care. You had 2 periods of good service, and it's an individual determination, but it's not the same as getting your DD 214 updated.
Right. Yeah.
So I was like, wow, I never knew that. And he talked
me
about how
neither.
you do it. And apparently it's very common, but a
Mhm.
lot of people, if you don't engage with the VA to ask them
Mhm.
and you don't start the process, it'll never happen.
Sure.
But it's available. And so many veterans I was talking to said, I had bad paper. I'm not eligible for anything. No, you probably are. Yeah. And there was actually a court case. This is kind of temporal in this. Literally today, I was reading an article about somebody who had a TBI and started smoking weed to deal with all the challenges. And he was kicked out of the Marines and had applied because they had a court case and said, hey, if it was for, if you had a military sexual trauma, PTSD, or a TBI, and you had a not good discharge, it had to be reviewed.
Yeah.
Well, the other services, the Air Force, the Army, about 55% were upgraded. They said, yeah, you got a raw deal. You'd served honorably. Everything was normal. And then you came back, you had a head injury, you had PTSD, you started acting out. And that was the TBI and PTSD. That's not you normally.
Yeah. I would like to your point, I'd like to see them rewrite the instructions for the Purple Heart as well, because it's a pretty constrained idea, is that you have to have a physical injury essentially to be eligible for a Purple Heart. Now, I mean, obviously that would be difficult to where to draw the line, but these type of wounds on the inside are not to be trifled with. These are serious things that are life altering for people. Doesn't mean life ending, life altering. And we have to view them differently. And I think that's largely how we stigmatize them structurally. We don't even realize that that's what's happening.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And, the interesting thing is that, like with TBIs, it is a physical injury.
Correct.
It's just on the inside.
Right.
And you may not see it. You may not have a big old hole in your head. But, the science is there. And the new protocols, like with the NFL even, and with soldiers, you can do a blood test shortly thereafter and identify who has had a TBI and who hasn't.
Yeah.
Which is amazing, but that's also new. So I do think that there's a lot of merit to revisiting, especially in the new age of combat.
Sure.
What is a injury of not a disease? Because, it's not a disease, it's an injury. So I think there's a lot there to go after. But to finish my point about the discharges, the Navy was in the Marines under them was about 16%. Everybody else is like 50. They were like 16. And he sued. He goes, look, you guys aren't taking this serious. And he
go
won.
Figure. Yeah.
Right. And so they have been ordered to go back and review for like 10 years. And if you were before that, you can request it. But they have to apply a different strict criteria according to the court, as opposed to this willy-nilly standard that they were applying. Oh, you're just a bad sailor, bad Marine. That doesn't count. And so that's a big win for those folks because it's so prevalent. But after the fact, 10 years later, 15 years later, it's hard to go and say, oh, I was just doing something, it's not temporal in time.
Yeah.
But now you can go back and go, yep, because it was a class action. So it applies to everybody. So that is good news.
Yeah.
To be able to go fix these things.
Yeah, no, that's progress. That is progress.
I was so surprised, because I know how these things usually go.
Yeah, that's true. And we're learning a lot about complex trauma versus single event traumas. And I think there's one of the deficiencies of the VA system, the way we appraise these issues, is we want a PTSD index event. But whenever you're over there, like you and I both were in the Gulf area as well. You went to Afghanistan as well. I stayed in and out of Iraq and off the coast of Somalia. It's hard to pin down exactly one single memory that you found the most distressing, or one single event that you felt was the precipitating event that caused a change in you. So I think we're getting a little better within the mental health field of establishing almost a separate criteria for complex trauma versus, because there's all of
It's almost cumulative trauma.
Yes, it is. It is compounding and cumulative. Exactly. And it looks a lot different. Somebody who has, let's just say, multiple concussive blasts in theater versus somebody who has a car accident and it's one single event, it looks differently. It's not 1-to-1. It's not the exact same symptomology. So I think a lot of times people got, either swept under the rug or it slipped through the cracks because there were just all these subtle changes across time that nobody really was paying attention to. Yeah.
So I do want to say I don't have PTSD. There's all these changes, and I actually really enjoyed my time in combat. It's one of those weird things. You never feel so alive as you do. And it was weird. You don't know how you're going to react, but I really just, no problems. But I should, if you were to go like, hey, if you see X, Y, Z, experience A, B, C, you're going to have PTSD. And I didn't have a lot of moral injury because I could do something about it. When I saw things that were bad, I could go fix it. If somebody was doing something illegal or immoral, they aren't doing it in front of me. As a law enforcement guy, they knew who I was, and they weren't doing it. Now, at the same time, I was at 9/11, was helping pull out bodies. I've been to dozens and dozens of autopsies, lots of combat folks killed back and forth, dealing with prisoners, dealing with all sorts of things that are, horrific. At the same time, able to compartmentalize and sort of deal with it factually because I'm just there to, collect evidence and other things and sort of detach. But I was also getting rocketed and mortared every day. Right. And so how do you differentiate between one precipitating event for somebody that is having a hard time?
Right.
And you and I were talking the other day, and I said, the guys that drive the trucks and the guys who do the logistics, I said, those are the heroes. Those are the folks, when they say they have PTSD, I know why, because they couldn't go do anything about it. They're getting rocketed, mortared, and driving over IEDs every day. Whereas like the infantry guys can go and like raid a village, or the artillery guys can shoot back. And I think that is some of the most frustrating and I don't want to say PTSD causing, but sort of a definitely part of the combination is not being able to do anything in retaliation or in reaction other than duck and hide.
Yeah.
And so
that's
sort of a challenge.
Yeah. Rules of engagement are rules of engagement. They're constraining on purpose, right? And obviously in intense situations, they often are insufficient, obviously. But you're right. I think there is something about having the means to handle yourself. But yet again, the rules of engagement can be constraining there as well, because you may have the means to do something about it, but you don't have the military authority to do it.
And that gets more. So that's why I always say, if you're going to go to war, go the first time, go in the early parts. The rules are not set up. It's kill or be killed. It's same thing when I was in Bosnia. And then, as time went on, it became much more tightened up. And same thing with Iraq. Very early on, you could pretty much, as long as you weren't like being totally war criminal, somebody aimed a gun at you, you'd shoot them. You didn't like, hey, I need a, stop, wave, shoot a pen flare, shout commands 3 times and pat my tummy and tap my head.
Yeah.
It was different. And so there was.
And branches have different guidance
so.
As well. Me being a Navy guy, like our guidance was often made from, region down versus on the ground up. Right.
Yeah.
So, it's difficult to encompass everything that I just wanted to speak to that as well.
Very much so.
So if you're out there, if you heard what Tyler just said and you're thinking, well, shit, I have PTSD and I was in combat arms. I was in infantry. Does that make me weak? Does that make me deficient? is that know that these things are complicated interactions. And as we've talked about before, with the diathesis stress model, you never know what you're taking into the uniform with you. There's genetic vulnerabilities that we walk around with. And cumulatively, as we spoke just a second ago, cumulatively, these things can overwhelm the system. When you've reached allostatic load for your mental health, so to speak, there's going to be problems within that system. So don't see it as, oh, well, I had this issue. None of the people in my unit or my platoon did.
They did.
Yeah.
Some of them, I guarantee you did.
Oh, it's a really complicated interaction, and because things are often cumulative in nature, you may not be seeing what they're dealing with in the future. So it may have gotten you sooner. Doesn't mean that it's not going to have those effects in their life as well. Yeah,
huge.
Yeah.
And everybody's different, and that's one thing that I've come to realize is, like, oh, I can't judge somebody else's experience and what they were feeling and what they're feeling now based on what kind of work they did. And that's the reason I brought up like the truck drivers and the logistics folks. You think, oh, they're safe on a base. They're just driving a tractor trailer. It's not that big of a deal. No. Like, I have a lot more understanding of what type of conflicts they were dealing with, because they're like victims, I guess. They're terrorists that are trying to kill them.
Yeah.
And that's huge. I mean, how do you deal with that kind of in a psyche on a daily basis and go, oh, that's nothing? No, of course it is. Everybody's different.
Have you ever heard of Sebastian Junger? He wrote a book called Tribe, A Homecoming, right?
That's right. Yep, I have heard of it.
So he talks about PTSD rates in the non-combat arms, in which, I don't know what Sebastian's experiences are. I know that he was a combat correspondent. He was embedded with he's been to a lot of places. But to your point, just because somebody who was in convoys develops PTSD, you're seeing it, oh, well, why is it that people who are in convoys are developing PTSD at different rates than grunts, for example? Well, a couple different things. Number one, grunts may be less inclined to report. All right. So let's not make a correlation where there is none. Right. Number two, that's really scary. It's really scary to be peeling potatoes in Iraq, or it's really scary to be, in a convoy, because there are things that you may not realize that are going on that are existentially threatening every step of the way. So when I read Sebastian's book, and I couldn't help but go, I understand the argument you're making, but at the same time, you are inadvertently reinforcing some of the self-degradation that we impose on ourselves from the uniform, that, well, we shouldn't feel this way. We shouldn't have PTSD because we were laying down cable in Iraq or whatever. And I think that doesn't further the conversation. It doesn't help us move to a place that we can feel a sense of completeness, integration about our service after the uniform,
That's a great point, because anytime you have a bunch of veterans, they'll all start talking about their service, and then there'll be a game of one-upsmanship.
Yeah.
And it's probably as old as time, going back to the Romans or something. Like, I was in 3rd Legion.
Yeah.
I
was in the 13th. Yeah.
Right.
I was right under Julius Caesar. Yeah, I get it.
Right. And so there's all this one-upmanship about, how, dangerous it was and all these things. And sometimes I think we really miss, or we fail to appreciate that you're in a combat zone. And when there's rockets and artillery coming in and mortars, it's not precision fire here. And so it's that I don't have a safe space. I'm in danger, and your body reacts differently.
Yeah.
Like, I slept a lot when I could. Like, I would go to bed like 6 in the evening and be up at 6 in the morning, but I would sleep like a log. I actually slept through an entire attack because I was just so dead tired. I didn't even hear it. And there's, 50 cal shells everywhere I go outside, and there's all, craters everywhere. I'm like, what the hell happened? And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, last night, what happened? Where's all this stuff come from? They're like, dude, where were you? I'm like, I was in bed. Because I was just like, that's how my brain processed all that sort of, the constant stress.
Yeah. And it is constant stress.
And so getting used to that and how you deal with it. And if you don't have the opportunity to do whatever mechanisms that are healthy to help resolve that stress, like sleeping or, exercise and things like that, it gets worse. And so, I know I don't have PTSD. I may have it in the future. I don't know. But so far, so good. But at the same time, how do you tell? And you mentioned earlier, there's a lot of parallels between the symptomology of TBIs and PTSD.
Yeah.
And so, maybe there's some combination, but, like the traditional things, it doesn't affect my work. It doesn't affect my family life. It does, so it's not causing a problem.
There's no social and occupational impairments. Yes.
Right.
Now, by the way, Tyler, I was not implying that you.
No, but but there's so much comorbidity between the two that it's almost implied or assumed that one is with the other.
Well, it's like depression and anxiety with PTSD as well. Yeah,
very much so. And it's okay to say, nope, this is different. I have this, and or if you're not comfortable saying you have PTSD because you have a TBI, okay, that happens too. I guarantee it. Yeah. Because that's an injury. And that's mental health. Ooh, scary. Dude, go talk to people. Talk to somebody like Ryan. It doesn't matter if you have some diagnosis or not. Talking to people and having a tribe or someone you can talk to helps. And I think that is probably one of the main reasons I was able to adjust pretty well. Everybody I know is either a cop, in the military, or has been around the military in some way, even if they hadn't served themselves. And so even the comedy and the culture, I have a whole group of guys. We have a whole running chat of things we would never post. Okay. Like
gallows
anywhere.
humor. Yeah.
Very gallows humor, very juvenile, but allows us to talk and communicate and keep in touch with, sort of risque humor that we all get. But it's sort of that tribe. You're belonging to a group, and I think that is actually the more important part of it, is that group cohesion and membership. That is the most important thing I think folks have for mental health, and that's why they always ask, like, do you have someone you can talk to? Things like that. People lie on those, okay? In case you're wondering, but
I couldn't agree with you more. Most of my research has been within stress and social support. I really think that social support, specifically turning into military social support, turn into your buddies who served as well, really can be the remedy for some of these issues after the uniform, because they make you feel more integrated. They make you feel more connected because they understand your shared culture, your shared worldview, because they've had those same challenges and sacrifices. They really do. That, to me, just is my humble opinion, that is the remedy for a lot of these ails after the uniform, is to turn to each other. The veteran identity, veterans are your greatest resource out there in the world. I just want to say one thing. It has been years since I have read Sebastian Junger's book. So if somebody out there is like, wait a minute, Ryan, that's not what he said.
You're going on your own recollection.
Yeah, exactly. Which is always spotty. But I tell you what, Tyler, we're up against the hour here. So is there anything else that you feel like we should have covered here that encompasses who you are and the Coming Home Well mission?
So there is one thing I do want to call out, is that we have a transition sort of a podcast that's interspersed with the Coming Home Well podcast. It's called Coach's Corner, and I would be really remiss if I didn't talk about it. Alfredo Torres, he is the transition leader at the Department of Veteran Services. He is on every week with tips, tricks, ideas, motivations The dude's all over LinkedIn. He is the most motivating guy I've ever known because he did not have an awesome transition. He was a Navy guy. He got out and was basically homeless. Couldn't figure it out, was having a lot of challenges. And over time, with a lot of support, he was able to go, oh, okay. And he's a wonderful guy. He's like awesome. But he was having some challenges. So he gets the other side. Like I didn't end up on the street or anything. So I may understand some, but he knows what it's like to be living in your car, not knowing what it's like to where your next meal's coming from. So he getting that kind of a yin and yang. So go listen to Alfredo. It's on Coach's Corner. It's under Coming Home Well. The advice he gives, is always motivating. But it's very much focused on transitioning, on the guys getting out, or if you've been out for a while and you're still not quite getting there yet, he's also great. And that's always a challenge, and that's something I think we do forget about. We very much focus on the first year or two after people get out of service, but you're transitioning. You could be transitioning 10 years later.
For life. Yeah.
It's not new. And so, hey, you think, I'm not eligible for X. Most of the time that's BS. Okay. And there's always somebody out there that can help you. We've talked to hundreds. In fact, I got a notice today. We've switched to Spotify. It was our 100th episode. I was like, cool. And we've done a lot before, and then we've changed things. But on our current platform and our current way of doing things, everything from getting a suit for free to go do interviews, to resume reviews, to I don't know if you've ever talked about Veterati. I can't talk enough about it. Literally senior people that are veterans that are there to coach you as you are transitioning. And I use it. I've talked to senior executives at Microsoft, at Google, and they're out there, they're veterans, and they put themselves available to coach you. And I'm like, it's called Veterati. Go just Google it.
I will.
And Alfredo does it. But there's a lot of people, no matter what you're into, like, hey, I want to be a radio host. I want to be a podcast host. There's somebody out there that's like world famous that is there, and you can just schedule an appointment and they set it up so you can talk with them and learn from them and form relationships. It's really cool. But there's so many of these great organizations. And then there's groups like yours with Vet with a Mic, where you talk about a lot of these issues in a slightly different way than we do, with that mental health background that you have, which I think is awesome, because we definitely need more of that and more normalization of how the heck we transition, because we're all different.
Yeah, we are.
And getting it. And sometimes all you need is the right message to the right person at the right time. If you can get all three, you're usually doing pretty good.
Yeah. It definitely is there are just a myriad of individual forces within individuals that every combination is going to be a little different for everyone. And it's just finding the right combination for you. So I guess that's a good place to call it right there, Veterati. So I just want to make sure that Coming Home Well, and it's a .com, right? It's
a .com, and there's a .org, but do .com.
Yeah. And of course, they are also on Instagram and Facebook and across all the social media platforms as well. That's actually how I stumbled across them as well. But if you've enjoyed this conversation with Tyler and you feel as if there's somebody in your life who could benefit from hearing it, please do us a favor, spread the word. Largely what we do here relies upon good people like you spreading the word to others about the awesome chats that we're having here on Vet with a Mic and the great things which Coming Home Well organization is doing. And in saying that, if there's a particular topic you want to see covered here on Vet with a Mic, reach out to me on all the social media platforms, or you can hit me up at ryan@vetwithamic.com, and I will do my best to make that episode come to fruition. But as always, however life may find you, hope life finds you well. Till next time.